Dinosaur Detectives, written by Peter Crisp. Dinosaur Detectives. For thousands of years, people all over the world have found enormous bones and wondered what they were. In many countries, these bones gave rise to stories of giants and dragons. Today, we know that the huge bones belonged to dinosaurs. These were amazing land reptiles which walked our Earth for more than 160 million years, until they died out 65 million years ago. Yet, amazingly, it is only recently that we have found out that dinosaurs existed at all. In this book, you can read the stories of some of the people who first discovered the truth about the huge bones. They were like detectives, collecting evidence and using it to put together a picture of life in the distant past, when our world was the home of the dinosaurs. Mary Anning, one of the first fossil hunters, she discovered her first prehistoric creature when she was just 11 years old. Gideon Mantle. This English doctor found a huge tooth. It led him on the trail of a beast he called Iguanodon. Richard Owen. This brilliant scientist invented the word dinosaur and held a party inside a concrete model of one. Othniel Marsh. This rich American and his rival Edward Cope hunted for fossils in the Wild West. They discovered and named many new kinds of dinosaur. Werner Janensch, this German scientist, led the greatest dinosaur dig in history. What he discovered changed the way we see our world. Jack Horner. This American scientist dug up dozens of dinosaur nests, many still containing eggs and babies. The Fossil Woman. Welcome to my fossil shop. My name is Mary Anning. I've lived here in Lyme Regis all my life. I was born in 1799 above this very shop, where my father was a carpenter. For 6 days of the week, father worked hard making furniture. But on Sundays, he would take me for walks along the beaches to look for fossils. He sold them to the ladies and gentlemen who come to the seaside every summer. Father taught me how to tap a rock in just the right place with a hammer to make it split open. Often there would be nothing inside it, but sometimes we would find the skeleton of a beautiful fish or a curly shell. We call the shells snake stones because they look like curled up snakes. Scientists call them ammonites. The best time to find fossils is after a storm, when the wind and waves batter the cliffs and make them crumble. When a storm hits Lyme Regis, all sorts of strange creatures just fall out of the cliffs. Father said that we were fishing for curiosities. It was a bit like fishing because we never knew what we would catch. But our fish were made of stone. Fossils. Fossils are the remains of plants and animals preserved in rock. Many fossils are bones which have gradually turned to stone. Lyme Regis. Lyme Regis on the south coast of England is still one of the best places in the world to find fossils. Fossil Seller. Mary Anning, 1799 to 1847, was the first person to make a living by selling fossils. Ammonites. These ancient relatives of the squid lived in the sea and caught food with their tentacles. My poor father died in 1810 when I was just 10 years old. Mother made some money by selling fish, but it was not enough for us to live on. I knew that I had to work to help feed my family. I decided that I would spend all my time looking for curiosities to sell. One day, I was looking for fossils with my brother Joseph. Walking along the beach, I looked at the cliff and saw something wonderful staring back at me. It was the skull of a strange animal. And what a skull! It must have been a metre long, 4 feet, with a big round eye hole and jaws stuffed with sharp teeth. "It's a sea dragon, Mary," said Joseph excitedly. We hammered at the rocks until we could free the skull. Although it was very heavy, we managed to carry it home. Joseph and I looked at pictures of animals in a book to see if we could discover what it was. We decided that it must be a crocodile. Fishing. Many people in Lyme Regis made their living from fishing in the sea. Tools. Mary used simple tools like this hammer and chisel to split open rocks and chip out fossils. Seashells. Mary's fossil discoveries made her famous. The tongue twister, "She sells seashells on the seashore," is thought to refer to her. I was sure that the rest of the crocodile was still there, buried in the cliff. All I had to do was wait for another rock slide. So, after every storm, I would go back to the spot where we found the skull, hoping to see the rest of the skeleton. It was almost a year later, in 1812, that the rocks finally fell away. There was my creature! But it wasn't a crocodile. Instead of legs, this animal had short paddles. It looked more like a fish. I chipped the skeleton free with my hammer, and we carried it carefully back to our shop. News quickly spread that the Annings had found a sea dragon. Everyone wanted to have a look, and we were able to charge visitors some money to see it. Then we sold the skeleton to a local nobleman for £23, more money than I'd ever seen before. At this time, I met my first geologists, scientific gentlemen who came to see the creature and argue about what it was. One of these geologists, Mr. Koenig, gave my creature a name: Ichthyosaurus. Geology. Geology, the study of the earth and its rocks, was a new science in Mary's time. Ichthyosaurus. This creature's name means fish reptile in Greek. Reptiles. Reptiles are the group of animals that includes lizards and snakes. Ichthyosaurus was a reptile that swam like a fish. Naming. Scientists gave all plants and animals Greek or Latin names. When I was 22, I found an even stranger creature in the cliffs. It had a tiny head, an amazingly long neck and 4 flippers. It took me months to chip it free from the rocks, but it was time well spent. I was able to sell it to the Duke of Buckingham for £100. I showed the skeleton to a geologist called Mr. Kauneuber, who visited me. His mouth dropped open in astonishment. "I have never seen anything like this before," he said. "It has the head of a turtle and the paddles of a whale, but its neck is like a giant snake. I shall call it Plesiosaurus, which means almost a reptile." My Plesiosaurus made me famous, though some geologists accused me of having created a fake fossil to make money. Then last year, I discovered a reptile with wings. A fossil expert called Professor Buckland has named it Pterodactylus macronix. He says that the poor beast must have drowned in the sea. Of course, finds such as these are very rare. Mostly I live by selling ammonites. Would you like to buy one? Artist's view. This etching from Mary's time shows the sea swarming with ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs. Sold for £100. In Mary's time, £100 was a huge sum of money. An ordinary family of 5 would be lucky to earn £1 in a week. Many people earned much less. Flying reptiles. Pterosaurs were flying reptiles which lived at the same time as the dinosaurs. Almost a reptile. William Cowneuber published a description of the plesiosaurus in 1821. He apologized for giving it such a vague name. The strange tooth. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to my lecture. My name is Gideon Mantle. Today, I'm going to tell you about a remarkable discovery that I made in 1822. At the time, I was a doctor in the English county of Sussex. Although I practiced medicine, my real interest was in geology. Between visits to patients, I would always find time to collect fossils. One spring day, I was visiting a patient with my wife, Mary Ann. She had come with me to enjoy the fine weather. While I was busy, she strolled down the lane and saw a pile of rocks, used by workmen to repair the roads. In one of the rocks, my wife noticed something brown and shiny. Looking closely, she saw that it was a very large tooth. And here is that tooth. As you can see, it is worn away on the side from chewing, like the tooth of a plant-eating mammal. But it is an odd shape with ridges. I had never seen anything like it. The workmen took me to the quarry, where I was amazed to learn that the tooth had come from a very old layer of rocks. No mammal fossil has ever been found in such rocks. Busy doctor. Gideon Mantle, 1790 to 1852, visited up to 60 patients a day, but he still found time to collect fossils and write a book called The Geology of Sussex. Mrs. Mantle. Mary Ann eventually lost patience with her husband's fossil hobby. She left Gideon when his fossil collection took over their whole house. Teeth. Tooth shapes show what an animal eats. Plant eaters have short teeth for chopping and chewing leaves. Meat eaters have sharp, jagged teeth. Rock layers. Different types of fossils are found in different layers of rock. The oldest layers are the lowest in a rock face. A fossilized iguanodon tooth. I knew of one man who might be able to help me solve the mystery of the tooth. Only Professor Buckland has a bigger collection of fossils than I do. He has spent years collecting them from quarries around England. I travelled to the professor's home in Oxford and showed him the enormous tooth. "Remarkable, sir," said Buckland. "I fear I cannot help you to identify it. But let me show you a fossil." He led me to his desk, piled high with a jumble of rocks. Buckland pulled out a large bone and handed it to me. I could see that it was a jaw, for it held a long, sharp, curved tooth. "It looks like a flesh-eater," I said. "A very big flesh-eater." "It was found in a slate quarry not far from here," said Buckland. "As you will observe, it is shaped like a lizard's jaw. Yet from the size of the tooth, this lizard must have been more than 12 meters, 40 feet long. Think of that, sir. A 12-meter, 40 feet long flesh-eating lizard roaming around Oxfordshire." I confess that I shuddered at the thought. The professor went on. "I am going to call this great lizard a megalosaurus." Buckland. William Buckland was the scientist who named Mary Anning's pterosaur. Eccentric. Buckland kept a pet bear and often did chicken impressions in the middle of his lectures. Clever horse. Buckland's horse always stopped when she passed a quarry. She wouldn't move until he got off and looked for fossils. Megalosaurus. Buckland published a description of Megalosaurus bucklandi, Buckland's big lizard, in 1824. It was the first dinosaur to be named. Jaw of Megalosaurus. Buckland invited me to stay for dinner, but I made excuses and left. I had heard that the professor ate odd things, like hedgehog meat. As I travelled home, I thought about Buckland's discovery. I already knew of the giant sea reptiles discovered by Miss Anning at Lyme Regis. Now Buckland had found a huge land reptile. Perhaps my tooth also came from an ancient reptile. Was it possible, I wondered, that before the time of the mammals, there had been an age of reptiles? I found my next clue in 1825 at the Museum of the Royal College of Surgeons in London. Looking through the collection of skeletons, I came across a South American lizard called an iguana. Its teeth were shaped just like the one I had found, with the same ridges. The only difference was that my tooth was 20 times bigger. This convinced me that I had indeed found a reptile, like an iguana. I decided to call it iguanodon, or iguana tooth. Age of Reptiles. In 1838, Mantell published a book called The Wonders of Geology. It included this picture of a megalosaurus attacking an iguanodon. Strange meals. Buckland was famous for eating unusual animals. He always said that a mole was the most revolting thing he had ever tasted, until he ate a bluebottle. Iguana. The South American iguana can reach a length of 1.5 meters, 5 feet. Mantell pictured his iguanodon like an iguana, but 20 times bigger. Iguanodon. Mantell published his description of iguanodon in 1825. It was the second dinosaur to be named. Dinner in a dinosaur. I will never forget the party I went to in London on New Year's Eve in 1853. We ate our dinner inside an iguanodon. It was not a flesh and blood iguanodon, of course. It was a brick and concrete model, built to show the public what these remarkable beasts might have looked like. My name is Prestwick, and, like most of the guests on that evening, I'm a geologist. At the head of the table sat our host, Professor Richard Owen, an expert on animal skeletons. He had designed the splendid creature in which we sat. Owen rose to his feet and said, "Fellow scientists, let us drink to the memory of Gideon Mantell, discoverer of Iguanodon." We raised our glasses and cried, "Mantell!" There was a brief silence, as we each remembered the good doctor who had died the previous year. It was sad indeed that Mantell was not there to see his discovery brought to life. Skeleton expert. Richard Owen was able to study many different skeletons by cutting up animals that died at London Zoo. Crowd puller. In 1854, huge crowds went to the Crystal Palace in London to see the concrete models of Iguanodon and Megalosaurus. Exhibition. Owen's models were the world's first dinosaur exhibition. Nose horn. The concrete Iguanodon had a horn on its nose. Mantle and Owen had both misunderstood this bone. It was really the dinosaur's thumb. Thumb. As midnight approached, my friend Professor Forbes thanked our host for the splendid meal. Forbes said, "We owe Owen a great deal, gentlemen. Dr. Mantle and Professor Buckland thought of their discoveries as overgrown lizards. But in the 1830s, more bones of these huge reptiles were found, and Owen studied them closely. The professor has a great understanding of skeletons. He could see that, unlike lizards, these creatures held their bodies off the ground on straight legs. They were not giant lizards. They were a separate group of animals, which Owen has named Dinosauria. And now, if I may," Forbes added, "I would like to read you a poem that I have written. It is about this magnificent iguanodon in which we are sitting. 1,000 ages underground his skeleton had lain, but now his body's big and round, and he's himself again. A jolly old beast is not deceased. There's life in him again." At this, we all let out a huge roar, like a bellowing herd of iguanodons. Straight legs. Straight legs are better at bearing weight than the sprawling legs of lizards. It was thanks to their straight legs that dinosaurs could grow so much bigger than any other reptiles. 2 legs or 4? Owen mistakenly believed that all dinosaurs walked on 4 legs. Later finds showed that many walked on their hind legs, like this Giganotosaurus. Dinosaurs. In 1841, Owen invented the name dinosaur. It means terrible lizard in Greek. The Bone Hunters. My name is Matthew Randall, but all my friends call me Matty. Let me tell you about my young days out in America's Wild West. Back in 1868, I found work on the building of the Union Pacific Railroad. Laying those iron rails was hard work, and it was dangerous too. This was the homeland of the Sioux Indians, who hated the railroad. Without the protection of the U.S. cavalry, we wouldn't have lasted very long. For months on end, we lived on fried buffalo steaks, provided by our own hunter, Buffalo Bill Cody. One day, a group of strangers rode into our camp. There were about a dozen youngsters, led by an older fellow, who was short and plump. "Good day," said the older man. "I am Professor Marsh of Yale University, and these are my students. We are on a bone hunting expedition." This struck me as an odd occupation, although I was too polite to say so. Expeditions. In the 1870s, Othniel Charles Marsh, 1831 to 99, led his students on 4 fossil hunting expeditions to the west. Railroad. In the 1860s, the Union Pacific Railroad was built across the USA to link the cities of the East with the West. Buffalo Bill. William Cody earned his nickname by killing thousands of buffalo to feed the railroad construction workers. Sioux. The killing of the buffalo threatened the Sioux' way of life. They depended on buffalo for their food, clothing, tents, and tools. The professor had come to our camp to meet up with Buffalo Bill, who had offered to be his guide on the bone hunting expedition. Next morning, the bone hunters rode off with Bill leading the way and Marsh riding beside him. They had an escort of cavalrymen and 6 wagons. We wished them well and then went back to our work on the railroad. More than a month later, we met up with the professor again. His students now looked like real Westerners, with tanned faces and well-worn clothing. Marsh was full of stories of his adventures. He said that he'd shot an angry bull buffalo which was charging at him. He'd also made friends with some Sioux who called him Big Bone Chief. Then he showed us the wagon loads of bones he'd collected. He handed one of them around. "This one will have pride of place in my museum," he said. "It's a bird skull with teeth in its beak. It shows that birds must have evolved from reptiles. It proves that Darwin was right about evolution." We had no idea what he was talking about. Museum. Marsh was the nephew of millionaire banker George Peabody. He used his uncle's money to build the Peabody Museum at Yale to house his fossils. Darwin. In 1859, Charles Darwin suggested that animals are not fixed in one permanent form or species. They change over time to produce new species. He called this evolution. Bird with teeth. Darwin's followers believed that one group of dinosaurs grew feathers and took to the air. They evolved into birds. Early birds kept some reptile features, such as teeth. Proof. Darwin's supporters hoped to find fossils that would prove his theory. This was why Marsh was excited to find a bird skull with teeth. The professor said that if we ever found any strange bones, we should write to him at Yale. Then he set off home with his students and his collection of boxes. I guessed that this was the last I would hear of bone hunting. Over the next years, big changes came to the West. The railroads I helped to build brought thousands of settlers from the East. New towns sprang up all over the place. Most of the Indians were forced to make peace and live on reservations. In 1874, gold was discovered in the Black Hills in Sioux Territory. Soon we had a real gold rush, with trainloads of Easterners arriving, all hoping to strike it rich. I'd found a job looking after the train depot at a little place called Como Bluff in Wyoming. I had plenty of free time and I'd often walk up into the hills. There wasn't much to look at there, just a lot of dry, bare rocks. But one day in 1877, I found a bone sticking out of the rocks that was bigger than I was. Nearby, there was another huge bone and another. These bones seemed to go on forever. Headdresses. Sioux warriors wore eagle feather headdresses. Black Hills. The Sioux fought for the Black Hills. They won a victory at the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1877, but eventually they lost their territory. Reservations. Reservations were areas of land reserved or set aside for the Sioux and other native peoples to live in. In exchange for agreeing to live there, the Sioux were given food rations by the government. Bare rocks. The rocky hills of Wyoming have been worn away by rivers, rain, and wind. These areas, called badlands, are wonderful places to find fossils. I was going to send a letter to Marsh, but then I heard that a rich bone-hunting professor had arrived in Cannon City, not far away. I travelled there, expecting to find Marsh. But I was surprised to see a different fellow. He said his name was Edward Drinker Cope. I asked him if he knew Marsh. "Marsh!" shouted Cope, turning red in the face. "The man is a fraud and a thief." It seemed that Cope hated Marsh worse than poison. Then I told him about the bones I had found. He offered me $100. I had to show him the place and keep it a secret from Marsh's spies. Cope soon had a team of diggers at work, blasting the rock with gunpowder and prying the bones out with crowbars. Many bones were shattered and were thrown away. But Cope couldn't keep his secret forever. One day, a team of Marsh's diggers showed up. It was just like the days of the gold rush, only these fellows were after bones. Cope. Edward Drinker Cope, 1840 to 97, wrote over 1,400 books and articles and named more than 1,000 new animal species. Spies. Both Marsh and Cope hired spies to keep an eye on what the other one was doing. Broken bones. Eventually, the diggers invented ways to protect the bones they dug up. Marsh's men wrapped them in strips of cloth soaked in flour and water. Cope's men used boiled rice instead of flour. Useful technique. The practice of wrapping fossils in cloth and plaster of Paris is still used on some digs today. The Great Bone Rush. Cope and Marsh each had teams of diggers working all over the West. It was a race to describe and name the new species. As a result of this bone rush, they discovered almost 130 new kinds of dinosaur. Cope worked alone, but Marsh had a team of expert assistants to help him put the skeletons together. Marsh's dinosaurs came in many shapes and sizes. There was the flesh-eating Allosaurus, different reptile, and gigantic plant eaters like the Barosaurus, heavy reptile. There were also dinosaurs with horns, such as the Triceratops, three-horned face. The strangest dinosaur of all was one Marsh called Stegosaurus, roofed reptile. It had rows of mysterious bony plates all along its back. Meanwhile, Cope and Marsh attacked each other in newspaper articles. Their squabbling made both of them look silly, but it also made dinosaur a household word. Feud. Marsh and Cope fell out when Marsh pointed out that Cope had reconstructed a sea reptile with its head on the end of its tail. This humiliated Cope, who never forgave Marsh. Heavy reptile. Barosaurus belonged to the sauropod family of dinosaurs, which were the largest animals ever to walk the earth. Roofed reptile. Scientists still argue about what the Stegosaurus used its plates for. Some think they helped the animal control its temperature. Others believe they were used to signal to other dinosaurs. Triceratops. Allosaurus. Stegosaurus. The biggest bone dig. My name is Dr. Werner Janensch. I've just come home to Germany after spending 3 years in Africa, leading a huge dinosaur dig. Back in 1907, I heard that some giant bones had been found at a place called Tendugaru in East Africa. I raised the money for an expedition and sailed to Africa in 1909. I hired hundreds of local workers to do the digging. Tendugaru lies far inland, and there are no roads. All our food and supplies had to be carried on foot from the coast. The bones we dug up had to be carried back in the same way. I was expecting to find new dinosaurs in Africa. The baffling thing was that my bones belonged to the Brachiosaurus and other species that have also been found in America. Africa and America are separated by the wide Atlantic Ocean. How on earth did these lumbering beasts get from one continent to the other? We've come back with more than 80,000 dinosaur bones. Now I've got to try to sort them out. Life's work. Werner Janensch, 1878 to 1969, spent the rest of his life working on the bones he brought back from Africa. Leg bone. Brachiosaurus was so big that its femur, upper leg bone, was as long as a person. Brachiosaurus. Janensch's Brachiosaurus is now on display in Berlin. At 11.8 metres, 39 feet high, and 22.5 metres, 74 feet long, it is the world's largest complete dinosaur skeleton. In Berlin, I showed my Brachiosaurus skull to some of our geologists. This is an American dinosaur, I explained. How did it end up in Africa? It's a mystery. Most of them were puzzled, but a young man called Alfred Wegener said, "It's not a mystery at all. This is exactly the type of dinosaur I would expect to find in Africa." Wegener pulled out a world map. Look at the coastlines of Africa and South America. Their shapes match exactly. I believe that they must have once been joined. Somehow they have drifted to their present positions. This is why you found the same dinosaurs in Africa and America. When your Brachiosaurus was alive, there was no Atlantic Ocean. We were all startled by this wild theory. Are you seriously suggesting that continents can roam around the Earth's surface? I asked. How is this possible? I don't know, said Wegener, but your Brachiosaurus is the proof that I am right. Wegener. In 1912, Alfred Wegener suggested that there was once only one huge landmass, which he called Pangaea. He believed that it had split into pieces. The pieces slowly drifted apart to form the continents that we know today. Wild theory. At the time, few scientists took Wegener's theory of continental drift seriously. It was not until the 1960s that he was proved right. Drifting continents. We now know that the Earth's surface is made up of several enormous plates floating on top of molten rock. Forces inside the Earth move the plates slowly. This is what made the continents move and split apart. Pangaea. 270 million years ago. South America. Africa. 130 million years ago. Present day. Dating the dinosaurs. Like detectives, early geologists collected evidence to piece together the story of life on Earth. Using fossils, they were able to place different periods of the Earth's history in order. They gave these periods names based on the type of rocks in which the various fossils were found. The age of the dinosaurs was divided into 3 periods. Triassic, when dinosaurs first evolved, Jurassic, when they became the main land animals, and Cretaceous, when new sorts, such as the horned dinosaurs, appeared. Geologists knew that Triassic dinosaurs must have lived before Jurassic ones. But they could only guess how long ago that was. It was not until the 1920s that scientists were able to work out the age of rocks. This was thanks to the study of radioactivity. Many rocks are made up of elements which are radioactive. These elements slowly decay or break down to form other elements. Scientists measure the amount of a radioactive element in a rock. They can then work out how long the decay has been going on, and so when the rock was formed. Radioactive decay is like a clock ticking away inside the Earth's rocks. Using this clock, scientists were able to date the rocks holding the dinosaur fossils. This told them when the dinosaurs had lived. Triassic. 248 to 205 million years ago. Early dinosaurs, like this small Herrerasaurus, evolved in the Triassic period. Jurassic. 205 to 144 million years ago. In this period, dinosaurs like Diplodocus reached their largest size and dominated the whole Earth. Cretaceous. 144 to 65 million years ago. This was the age of the horned dinosaurs, such as this Protoceratops. Elements. Elements are the basic substances, such as carbon and iron, that all things are made of. Radioactive elements include potassium and uranium. Baby dinosaurs. In 1978, US paleontologist Jack Horner came across the bones of a baby dinosaur in a fossil shop in Montana. He knew this was an important discovery, for very few baby dinosaurs had ever been found. Horner traced the fossil back to the rocky hillside where it had been discovered and began to dig. Soon, he had uncovered a huge nest. It was over 2 meters, 6 feet wide, and contained 15 baby dinosaurs and lots of crushed eggshells. In the 1980s, Horner's team found more nests at the site. Some of them contained eggs and newly hatched babies. Horner knew that the soil around the nests could hold clues. By sifting the soil and examining it under a microscope, he discovered the remains of chewed-up leaves and berries. He also found dinosaur droppings containing woody debris from conifer trees. Like a real detective, Horner used this evidence to form a picture of the lives of these dinosaurs. Can you work out what he discovered? Jack Horner. Dr. Jack Horner, born in 1946, is one of the world's leading experts on dinosaurs. He was the technical advisor for the films Jurassic Park and The Lost World. Paleontology. A modern dinosaur detective is called a paleontologist. Paleontology is the study of ancient life. It comes from the Greek word palaios, which means ancient. Fossilized baby. Horner's team chipped away the rock to discover this fossilized eggshell containing a baby hatchling. Jack Horner's most important discovery was that the babies were being looked after by their parents. He called this dinosaur Maiasaura, which means good mother lizard. The evidence for parental care was the size of the 15 babies. Since they were 3 times bigger than newly hatched ones, they must have stayed in their nest for weeks after hatching. Since they were 3 times bigger than newly hatched ones, they must have stayed in their nest for weeks after hatching. They had crushed the eggshells in their nest as they moved around. The chewed-up leaves and berries were food brought by the parents. The mystery is why the babies died. Perhaps something happened to their parents and the babies starved to death in the nest. In 1984, Horner's team made another discovery. They found the bones of 10,000 Maiasaura that had been killed by a volcanic eruption. Finding so many animals together shows that they lived in huge herds. Herds. Fossil footprints are further evidence that some dinosaurs, such as these Gallimimus, travelled in herds. The young stayed in the middle of a herd, while the adults walked on either side for protection. Like modern animals, Jack Horner says, dinosaurs basically aren't any different from animals alive today. They just looked different. Nest site. Horner thinks that these Maiasaura return to the same nest site year after year, just like many birds and turtles do today. End of the dinosaurs. 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs disappeared from the Earth. No one knows for certain why this happened, nor why some other animals, such as mammals and fish, survived. Scientists do know that the Earth's climate was cooling down at the time. If dinosaurs were cold-blooded, like modern reptiles, they may have been unable to cope with the cold weather. Warm-blooded mammals could have taken over. In 1990, a huge crater about 200 kilometers, 124 miles across, was found on the seabed off Mexico. It was formed 65 million years ago, when a massive object, such as a meteorite, crashed into the Earth from space. The impact of such a large meteorite would throw up a huge cloud of dust and gases. This would block out the sun's light for months. Without sunlight, plants would die, followed by the animals that ate them. Perhaps this is what happened to the dinosaurs. Cold-blooded. Lizards and other cold-blooded animals depend on outside heat to control their body temperature. They have to bask in the sunshine to warm up. Warm-blooded. People, lemurs, and other warm-blooded animals control their body temperature by converting food into heat. They need more food than cold-blooded animals. Meteorites. Meteorites are rocks which hurtle through space, occasionally smashing into the Earth. Today's detectives. When Mary Anning went fossil hunting, her only equipment was a geological hammer and chisel. But today's dinosaur detectives have many more tools at their disposal. In 1998, scientists in California took the skull of a Tyrannosaurus rex and scanned it for 500 hours with X-rays. They produced hundreds of computerized images. These pictures revealed that the dinosaur had huge olfactory lobes, the parts of the brain used for smell. T-Rex clearly had a powerful nose. Dinosaur modelling has come a long way since the concrete iguanodon in 1853. Today, experts examine fossils for marks where muscles were attached. These show the modellers where to add flesh to give the body its shape. Even so, much is guesswork. Fossils can't show us the colour of a dinosaur's skin or eyes. People are still hunting for dinosaurs and new species are being discovered. Perhaps, lying in the rocks beneath your feet, there are the bones of unknown dinosaurs. Tyrannosaurus rex. T-Rex, king tyrant lizard, was a huge meat-eating dinosaur, up to 6 meters 20 feet high and 12 meters 40 feet long. It lived in the late Cretaceous period, about 67 to 65 million years ago. Smell. T-Rex used its sense of smell to track down food, either living animals to hunt or animals that had already died. Computers. Thanks to computer animation, we can see how dinosaurs moved in films such as Jurassic Park and in museum displays around the world. Glossary. Ammonite. A prehistoric sea creature with a coiled shell. Ammonites are among the most common fossils. Cold-blooded. To have a body temperature that varies with the surroundings. Reptiles and fish are cold-blooded. Continental drift. The theory that the continents were once joined together, but split apart and slowly drifted to their present positions. Cretaceous. The third period in the age of the dinosaurs, 144 to 65 million years ago. Dinosaurs. Land reptiles that lived between 248 to 65 million years ago. Many dinosaurs were very big. The name dinosaur means terrible lizard in Greek. Elements. The basic substances such as hydrogen, carbon and iron that all things are made of. Evolution. The theory that species of animals and plants gradually change over long periods of time to produce new species. Extinction. The complete dying out of a species. Fossils. Traces of animals and plants preserved in rocks. Fossils include bones, skin and footprints. The name means dug up in Latin. Geology. The study of the earth and its rocks. Jurassic. The second period in the age of the dinosaurs, 205 to 144 million years ago. Mammals, a group of warm-blooded animals with hair. Mammals give birth to live young, which they feed on milk. Mice, whales, horses and humans are mammals. Meteorites, large rocks that hurtle through space and occasionally smash into the Earth. Naturalist, a scientist who studies animals and plants. Paleontology, the study of ancient life, from the Greek word palaios, which means ancient. Pterosaurs, flying reptiles that lived at the same time as the dinosaurs. Quarry, a place where stone is dug out of the ground. Radioactivity, the energy released by elements such as uranium as they slowly break down or decay. Radioactivity can be used to date rocks. Reptiles, a group of cold-blooded egg-laying animals with scaly skins. They include lizards, snakes, tortoises and crocodiles. Sauropods, a group of huge long-necked dinosaurs that include Barosaurus. Species, a group of animals or plants that can breed together and that differ only in minor details. Triassic, the first period in the age of the dinosaurs, 248 to 205 million years ago. Warm-blooded, to have a body that stays constantly warm. Mammals are warm-blooded.